We open today's adventure in an Arizonian saloon. It's a nice enough building, wooden and quiet. Various cowboys, farmhands, and other Western-era dudes are seated at tables drinking coffee. Maybe something a little bit stronger. At one table is a young man, described as 16, maybe 17, wearing a cowhide vest, a red shirt, and a white hat. His hair is straw gold. He was just finishing up his plate of food when the narrator of our story first saw him. The kid didn't look like anything special. Probably just a rancher's son, right? The kid suddenly looks up. Outside, 4 men gather around the door to the saloon. They draw their guns, peek inside to spot their target, and then charge in. They unleash a hail of lead, but the kid flips up his table and draws his pistols. In an eye blink, he fires 3 shots and kills 3 of the men. But the 4th attacker has moved around behind him, and he's got the kid now. From out of nowhere, though, he is shot by our narrator, an older man with a mustache. The kid gets a bead on the narrator, unsure of exactly how he is involved in this attack. The man holds up his gun, claiming to be on the kid's side. But the kid isn't quite so sure. Why is this guy on his side? He doesn't know him. The man tucks his gun away. He isn't really sure why he helped him, other than the odds being unfair. Now that he thinks about it, the man sure does hope that this kid is an honest man, meaning that he is not a criminal. The kid reloads his gun, saying that he is an honest man. But there are some people who call him an outlaw. Quote, "I'm afraid that isn't the most welcome news I've ever heard," the man replies. The kid agrees, and they better move on. They dash outside, climb onto their horses, and begin to leave town. As they do, the pair exchange their names. Our narrator is named Everett Hawkmore, although most people just call him Hawk. The kid's name is Blaine Cole. "It's a pleasure," he says. Cole? Cole? Now why does that name sound so familiar? Hawk asks. Maybe you're thinking of Colt? That's what a lot of people have taken to calling Blaine. Kid Colt. Now Hawk grimaces, quote, "Kid, you are a well of unwelcome news," end quote. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 19.16, Kid Colt. Sheriff McGreely is not pleased with the report that his deputies give him upon our return to the comic. 4 experienced gunmen couldn't take down 1 child? Are you kidding me? One of the men adds that the kid was helped by some kind of drifter, but that doesn't calm McGreely down one bit. He slaps one of the men, actually knocking him clean off of a chair, but reins it in as the door to his office opens. A well-dressed man in black enters the room. Is this a bad time? He introduces himself as Samuel Gemmell, United States Marshal assigned to these territories. McGreely spits. "I'm the law in this county, federal boy." The marshal ain't here to argue that. He just wanted to let the sheriff know that the district judge would be visiting in a month, and he has taken a particular interest in the young Mr. Cole. "That murderer gunned down an innocent farmer in cold blood," McGreely says angrily. Marshal Gemmell doesn't rise to the bait. He stays calm. "That is for a jury to decide," he replies. Then the marshal takes his leave. One of the deputies asks McGreely, "You think he's going to make trouble?" The sheriff sneers. "He won't have the chance. The kid ain't going to live another month." McGreely already hired Sherman Wilkes, the deadliest bounty hunter around. Once he and his gang finish clearing some land for one of McGreely's brothers, they're going to start hunting for the kid. By clear some land, by the way, McGreely means kill the men who have a legal claim to it. That night, we catch up to Marshal Gemmell at his campfire. It's a simple thing, just a small fire, his bedroll, a metal kettle for some coffee in the morning. His horse wanders nearby, off any kind of tether, just nosing at the grass. The man is nearly asleep when his horse lifts its head. Kid Colt apologizes for waking the marshal, who suddenly starts awake, but he needed to speak to him. The kid heard about the judge's visit and his interest in having a fair trial. Is that true? Because he is innocent. He did not kill a farmer in cold blood. Don't you believe what the McGreelys tell you? The marshal doesn't seem too disturbed to have a gun pointed at him. Kid, he says, you have a funny way of presenting your case. The kid asks one more question. What if he could produce an eyewitness? Well, I'm sure that would go a long way to convincing the judge, Jamel replies. That's all the kid needed to hear. He fades into the night and then rides into the morning when he catches up with Hawk. He explains that he might have a good shot at clearing his name, assuming Jamel wasn't lying. All he needs is an eyewitness now. As he's giving this news to Hawk, one of our panels turns into a gun sight, and we see a man with long silver hair aiming down his rifle. He pulls the trigger, and Kid Colt is shot right out of his saddle. Which is where Chapter 1 of this book ends. As an opening chapter, I think that author Tom DeFalco and artist Rick Burchett do a solid job. We have a very exciting opening scene that even has some gunplay in it. This not only serves as a bit of a draw for someone who is leafing through the comic at the store, but it also demonstrates Kid Colt's shooting skills for us. When he fires 3 shots and he kills 3 men, he doesn't miss. He's got great aim. But it also shows that Kid Colt can still be outmaneuvered, for example, by the guy who snuck up on him. Kid Colt is superly skilled, but he is not unbeatable. His wingman, Hawk, is meant to be an audience stand-in. We are along for the ride in the same way that Hawk is. He is also our narrator for the length of this comic, and this is done to accomplish 2 things. The first is to put some distance between us, the audience, and the kid, our lead character. We don't get to know what's going on in his mind or his motivations. This leaves us wondering what he's doing, adding a little bit of mystery and some degree of tension to the story. Colt will routinely defy the expectations of those around him as this story goes on, and that works well because we aren't in his head learning why he's doing what he's doing. The second reason is that Hawk is much more of an audience member than he is a participant in this story. Normally, when you read a comic book, there's at least some degree of self-insertion going on. You know, if you read a Wolverine comic, it's because you see some part of yourself in Wolverine. The best heroes connect emotionally with the audience in some kind of way, but we don't get to have that with Kid Colt here, because Hawk is in the way. We are meant to be Hawk, and the Kid Colt is an unknowable outlaw gunman kid. This reinforces that distance from earlier and adds another layer of tension to the story. Hawk, after all, isn't the lead character. He isn't a Western hero or a legend either. He's just a guy. And that means that he might be able to die. So we have our lead character, we have our sidekick, and then, hey, guess what? DeFalco and Burchett introduce our main villain, Sheriff McGreeley. The sheriff isn't anything special, I'm afraid to say. He's an authority figure abusing his authority. We have seen this trope before in our Western comics, and we will probably see it until the end of time. DeFalco even has McGreeley hit one of his own deputies, showcasing that this guy is so evil that he will even abuse his own allies. So, yeah, he's a bona fide jerk. There's not a lot of creativity or originality when it comes to McGreeley, but as far as I'm concerned, that's also fine. He's meant to be the big bad of this book, so him being off in the distance being an a-hole works perfectly fine. We also have an ongoing plotline introduced, namely Kid Colt's quest to clear his name. All of the previous iterations of Colt that we've read so far, in Blaze of Glory, in Sensational 7, and in the team-up with the Arizona Girl, have never really played with the idea that Kid Colt is an outlaw. It's just treated like it's a fact of life in those stories. He's an outlaw, he's accepted it, he's moved on, who cares, enjoy this comic book. But here, Colt still bristles at being an outlaw, and he wants to clear his name. This is even brought up in the Kid Colt and Arizona Girl one-shot, when the Arizona Girl says, "You could probably get a fair trial if you took it to court," and Kid Colt's like, they'll give up eventually. That is a nice bit of subtle, accidental character growth for me. To this version of Kid Colt, the killings that he did are fresh, and his outlawry is new and insulting still. So here, he bristles at it, and he wants it gone, which gives us our current plot where he's trying to clear his name. But we know where he's going to end up. As an outlaw, well into his 20s, maybe his 30s. We can guess that this attempt to clear his name isn't going to work out, and he ends up growing into the character that we see in the Kid Colt and Arizona Girl one-shot. That's a pretty cool way of showcasing Kid Colt's story growth, and by setting this story in his past, we also get an interesting and unique take on the character without fundamentally changing who he is or what his life story is. That is some smart, neat storytelling. McGreely hires someone to hunt the kid down, Mr. Wilkes, and we get a pretty solid cliffhanger to end Chapter 1 to round out the chapter. Even when I saw Wilkes aiming at the kid, I was not expecting him to actually, shoot him. How many times have we seen a Western hero get just injured in these comics? The only other time I can think of is the Rawhide Kid getting shot in the side in Apache Skies. And even then, he gets patched up and does the rest of the comic without ever mentioning it again. He doesn't have to care at all. So this moment legit caught me off guard. Even knowing that I was only 1/4 of the way through the comic, I was still like, holy shit.
No swearing.
Did they just shoot Kid Colt? That is the most surprising part of this story for me, that I was actually surprised by this story. And maybe I'm just an idiot, or I'm really good at transporting myself into the moment and the world of the comic book, but yeah, this actually caught me off guard. Chapter 2 picks up where we left off, with the kid falling from his saddle after being shot. Hawk jumps down to help him, but the kid knows that this isn't over yet. As Hawk approaches him, Colt dives into the man, rolling them both behind cover as his shoulder bleeds and another shot goes wide. I do have one small complaint here before I move on. Kid Colt was shot in the right arm, in the upper arm area, not quite the shoulder, although that is where the blood is shown coming from. When we see him tackling Hawk, though, he is grabbing Hawk with his left arm, which means that he is putting the entire body weight of that roll onto his shot-flooping arm. And sure, it's a life or death situation, so maybe he just pushes through based on the adrenaline, but we don't get a grimace, there's no cry of pain, there's nothing. I can buy that Kid Colt is a skilled gunman and survivalist, that just comes from training and experience, I get that. But he also has a incredibly high pain tolerance, just naturally. Yeah, sure, okay, whatever. Up in the surrounding hills, we see Mr. Wilkes and his gang of men. They're discussing Hawk and whether or not they should involve him in their job. And they're not really particular about Hawk's affiliation. If he rides with an outlaw, then he is probably an outlaw, and that means he is fair game for them. Another man, named Mr. Kane, notes that the kid isn't dead, and Wilkes says, "Of course not. McGreely offered a bonus for delivering him alive. Wilkes only shot to wound." I don't know why McGreely would want the kid alive, as he just needs him out of the way and keep him from proving his innocence, so really he just needs him dead, but I don't know, maybe he wants to torture him? Whatever, it's not a big plot point, it is just a weird thing, but it's not brought up again. "We'll shoot! Don't worry, Mr. Wilkes," a pair of cowboys say. "We'll run 'em down." They hop on their horses and ride off, much to Wilkes's dislike. A few more of his men join them, and they approach the kid's hiding place. So he draws, and he fires. 4 shots are fired, and 4 men are dead. Kid Colt and Hawk dodge behind pieces of cover until they finally reach the tree line. Wilkes and his men split up into a large circle and slowly close in from all sides. Inside the woods, Kid Colt and Hawk find the remains of a small cabin. Its roof has partially collapsed, and small pillars of smoke rise into the air. they find burned bodies inside, and Hawk is certain that it was the work of natives. But Kid Colt says otherwise. There are arrows littering the scene, sure, but they're from a bunch of different tribes. Plus, in his experience, Native Americans just leave you where you fall. They don't burn the bodies. It was scavengers that did this, the kind of men who slit your throat in the night and steal your gold teeth before you finish dying. Well, hearing that, Hawk is just pretty ready to move on. Like, right now just sounds like a great idea, kid. How about we hoof it? But they can't. The kid has a plan. Once the sun has gone down and the small burning embers gone out, we see Wilkes' men creep around the cabin. Hawk and Colt are shown sitting on top of a pile of wood, keeping watch. Wilkes' men close in quietly. And then they open fire. The bodies fall over. The men creep in and roll Colt's body over, and it's actually one of the burned corpses from earlier. The real Kid Colt and Hawk pop up from behind cover, aiming at the men, telling them to drop their guns. One of the men sneers. He'll see them in hell. Colt and Hawk open fire then, with Colt saying that he is sad to know that the man is right. He will see him in hell. When the gunfire stops, Hawk assures Kid Colt that he is witness to the fact that the kid gave them a chance to surrender. Mr. Wilkes and the rest of his men have now surrounded our heroes. Wilkes offers them the same chance that they gave his men. Drop your weapons. Colt isn't sure that he wants them to do that, which is when a posse of men ride up, their guns spitting. Wilkes' eyes go wide. It's the scavengers. Chapter 3 sees Kid Colt and Hawk provide cover fire, with the kid shouting for Wilkes' men to get to cover. Hawk and Wilkes are surprised by this act, but Wilkes is inclined to take the offer for help. As his men scurry into the building, Hawk is hit in the gut area with an arrow. Kid Colt tells him to fall back. He can handle the shooting. As 3 of their attackers fall, we see 2 of their number hiding behind a tree. The first, called Blood Eye, is impressed by the kid's skill. The second of them says that he has seen him on wanted posters. He's pretty sure, you know what, I think that's Kid Colt. Blood Eye turns and glares at the man. It might have saved some lives if you'd mentioned it sooner, Mr. Hodges. Inside the house, Kid Colt, Wilkes, and Hawk are the last men still standing after the shootout. And even then, Hawk has a hole in him, and Kid Colt's right arm is still held in a sling. Wilkes indicates that the kid's hospitality won't earn him a free pass with him, and the kid replies that he didn't expect it to. But his curiosity is suddenly piqued as Blood Eye and Mr. Hodges approach the cabin with a torch and a white cloth of surrender. Kid Colt goes out to talk to them. Blood Eye apologizes for attacking him. He and his men are honest thieves, outlaws, and killers, you see. They have a very strict code of honor about attacking their own kind of people. So the kid and that guy with him, meaning Hawk, are free to go. But they'll take the bounty hunter. Maybe this time they could make an exception? Kid Colt asks with a smile. Blood Eye strokes his thick white beard, smiling as well. Well, he's sure that they can reach some kind of agreement. The 2 men agree to trial by combat. Kid Colt turns his gun belt over to Hawk, while a huge man named Big Bull Banyan passes Blood Eye his bowler hat. Hawk comments that he has climbed mountains smaller than this guy. Wilkes says that Kid Colt doesn't have to do this for him. He can fight his own battles. But that's too bad, Kid Colt says, 'cause you're sitting this one out. Kid Colt and Banyan fight, of course. Colt lands a solid punch straight to his gut, but the guy doesn't even blink. He keeps swinging, but Kid Colt is small and fast, dodging every one of his punches. Then the kid rolls, kicks him in the crotch, and ends the fight with one final kick to the face. Bull Banyan falls backwards, and this time he stays down. Kid Colt looks to Blood Eye. I believe we had a deal? The scavengers leave, true to their word, and Kid Colt prepares to leave as well. He needs to get Hawk to a Sawbones, and Hawk would really like a bottle of whiskey. But they aren't done here yet. Wilkes aims his rifle at the pair. He certainly hopes that he will surrender, because he would surely hate to kill the man what just saved his life. With Chapter 1 being all masterfully done setup, DeFalco and Burchett spend Chapters 2 and 3 exploring the West, building up Wilkes as a villain, and showing us the kind of person that Kid Colt is. And for the most part, I really enjoy these chapters. Kid Colt is courageous, he's kind, and he's shown to be smart. Even when he knows that helping Wilkes may not change the bounty hunter's goal, he does it anyways, because it's the right thing to do. Yes, Kid Colt does kill people in this story, but only when they are trying to kill him already. And when he is offered a chance to resolve a conflict without murder, he does take it, as shown in his fight with Bull Banyan. And Kid Colt realizes the consequences of his actions. When the one guy says, "I'll see you in hell," Kid Colt agrees, sadly, because he knows that he's still murdering people. Even if he is legally innocent of his initial murder charges, spiritually, ethically, he is still killing people, and that is still wrong. So it isn't like he's a murdering maniac like the Black Rider, who doesn't care about the spiritual cost of his actions. That's a nice bit of depth, and again, I feel like it adds a slight difference to this iteration of Kid Colt versus a lot of the Western heroes that we've read up to this point, who kill, and some of them are pretty serious about it, but no one really seems overly remorseful about their actions. I also really dug the oddly funny bit with Bloodeye and Mr. Hodges. The majority of this story up to this point has been pretty serious and self-important, so having Bloodeye being exasperated at Hodges was kinda great. I also love him commenting about having honor, but only in regards to other outlaws. DeFalco did a really good job setting that joke up by having Kid Colt talk about how ruthless these scavengers can be. They're so ruthless that they'll slit your throat and then steal your teeth, unless you're a known outlaw, in which case they'll have a civilized boxing match with you. That is comedy by contrast, and DeFalco and Burchett do it pretty well. Perhaps the one complaint that I have about Chapters 2 and 3 is that everyone refers to everyone else in this comic as Mr. This or Mr. That. Even the bounty hunters or the outlaws do it. It just feels so out of place for this class of character. I know that DeFalco is doing it in order to give those characters names for us. Oh, I know what you're talking about, Mr. Hodges. I know what you're talking about, Mr. Wilkes. But it's just so awkward within the world. Especially when you have one of the outlaws named Bloodeye, and then another is named Bull Banyan, and then one of them's just named Mr. Hodges. Why is Hodges a Mr. and the others have cool outlaw names? Why isn't he Mr. Bloodeye or Mr. Banyan? Not that it matters, it's not important, it just sticks out to me when I'm reading the story, and it's just weird to me. Anyways, Chapter 4 sees Kid Colt staring down Mr. Wilkes. Through conversation, Kid Colt explains his origin to the man, that he was just a kid living with his family, his ma, pa, and younger brother, Jeb. Pa used to be a lawman, so he made sure to train Colt and Jeb in gunplay. And in a flashback, we are shown the two of them bouncing a can back and forth in the air, using their shots to manipulate it. They were not trained to kill people. That was never in the plan. They were just trained as really good shots. Until Joshua McGreely decided that he wanted their land. He managed to buy the surrounding farms from all of Cole's neighbors, but Pa knew the value of his land, and he was not selling. A few days later, Blaine was off picking up some supplies in town and missed the attack on the farm. When he got home, he buried his ma and pa. He never found little Jeb. Blaine was no idiot, though. He rushed into town and he found McGreely, calling the man out. Another gunman pointed a gun at the back of his head, smugly telling him that he just should have kept riding. Blaine rolls and shoots him, replying that he should have shot instead of talked. More of McGreely's men drew their guns, but Blaine shot all of them down, including innocent farmer Joshua McGreely. The way that the kid heard it, Sheriff McGreely shot the man, who brought him news of his brother's death, and then swore out a warrant for Cole's arrest. The rest of Joshua's gang fled after the killing, because they didn't want to be killed either, right? So now Kid Colt needs to find one of those men in order to prove his innocence in court, thus establishing why Wilkes can't capture him, or at the very least, why he shouldn't capture him. Wilkes actually believes this story based on their time together and the behavior that he has seen Kid Colt exemplify. And it's not mentioned, but Sheriff McGreeley did tell us in Chapter 1 that he hired Wilkes to clear some land for his brother, so he knows how McGreeley operates. Why DeFalco doesn't mention this at this point, I don't know, as it is the perfect reason for Wilkes to believe the kid. Hawk finds Wilkes' determination ironic. If he's such a man of honor, then why is he bounty hunting? Wilkes then gives us his backstory. He fought for the side of the South in the Civil War and offered a $1,000 death benefit to any of the men who joined his regiment. Doing so left him impoverished, but he gave his word. Thus, once the war was over, he took to bounty hunting in order to pay those debts. Only one widow remains, and capturing Kid Colt will pay her. Kid Colt wishes that he could help him with that, but he just ain't planning on getting arrested. Wilkes sets his rifle aside. He can't let the kid go, but he can offer him a fair fight. He tucks his jacket behind his back, revealing his sidearm. His hand lowers to hover near the gun handle, and Kid Colt watches him. One panel passes. Wilkes goes for the gun. Hawk shouts, "Kid!" And we hear just one gunshot. Later on, we see a man run news to Sheriff McGreeley. The sheriff of Twin Rivers just sent a telegram from Wilkes, reporting that Cole is dead. Please send the reward. McGreeley knows that Wilkes is a man of his word. He tells his deputy to wire him the money, and then get on a horse to pick up that body as soon as possible. In Twin Rivers, the sheriff looks over the corpse. "Huh, I always thought Kid Colt would be younger." Wilkes, who is covered in shadow, comments that few men live up to their legends. The sheriff holds the corpse's head up by his hair. "Ugh, did you have to shoot him in the face?" Wilkes assures him that he didn't have a choice. He climbs onto his horse and leaves, asking the sheriff to pass his regards along to McGreeley. Outside of town, Wilkes is joined by another horseman. "Did it work?" the newcomer asks. Wilkes takes off his hat, revealing himself to be Hawk. Like a charm. McGreeley sent the reward just like you said he would. Probably didn't want to piss off Wilkes. The newcomer, of course, is Kid Colt. He holds up a piece of paper with a single bullet hole in it. He can't blame McGreeley for being cautious. Wilkes was a formidable man. Colt says that he'll take the reward and wire it to the widow listed on the paper. Despite killing Wilkes, Kid Colt fulfills the man's mission. And Hawk agrees to that. So where's the kid headed after that? Back to finding a good eyewitness, the kid replies. How about you? The pair of them snap their reins. You know, Hawk thought he might just keep tagging along. Kid Colt is fine with that. Together, the pair ride off into the sunset and hopefully more adventures. Putting Kid Colt's origin in the final chapter of this book is a bit of a weird move, ending where his narrative begins. But it makes a lot of sense, actually, as sharing where he came from with Wilkes prompts the bounty hunter to share his own origin, informing us as to his motives and the kind of person that he is. As distasteful as I find Wilkes, formerly being a fighter for the South, I do say that I enjoy his personal sense of honor. He has done whatever he has had to do in order to pay those death bills, even if he finds those actions unpalatable. You get the feeling that if Wilkes could have gotten paid without killing Colt, then he would have. For myself, at least, within this story, Wilkes is a likable character, and I was kind of shaken up to have him die. Like, I was surprised how much I was like, he's dead? No, he can't be dead. Aw, come on, he's dead? I ain't saying that I wanted more comics with Wilkes in him or that I expect him to be the, next breakout character in comics, but I do think that there's a loss there, and it's sad to see kind of a conflicted, emotionally complex character like Wilkes die, especially off panel. I also think that Wilkes could have subbed in one of the bodies of his men or one of the scavengers and then called that body Kid Colt and then collected the bounty, much like Kid Colt did here at the ending. But I also don't think that Wilkes' sense of personal honor would allow that kind of behavior. Kid Colt, though, doesn't care, so long as he's able to fulfill Wilkes' end of his agreement with the soldiers, and then he's able to keep on living and, try and clear his name. That said, I love Kid Colt and Hawk using Wilkes' body to collect the bounty. That's a clever way of screwing over McGreely, but also finishing Wilkes' debt off. Sure, he did wound the kid, and he hunted him, and he was willing to attack him. But, for a bounty hunter, Wilkes was fairly considerate. Colt covering his debt feels like the right thing for him to do, given that he did just kill Wilkes, after all. And it fits the kid's general vibe of being good, even if he's an outlaw. This 2009's Kid Colt one-shot was a big mystery to me when I first encountered it. Like I said, it is a one-shot, and it is broken into 4 chapters, and there is nothing indicating any kind of tie to a publishing initiative, or a crossover event, or a broader storyline. It's just there. A miniseries, I can understand, or a one-shot in a series of one-shots like we had with the Mighty Marvel Western event. I can get that. I believe that I came across this book when I was searching for the Kid Colt and Arizona Girl comic, and then there was just single listing on mycomicshop.com where we had the comic, released in 2009, all alone by itself. So of course I bought it! Even then, I could not find any kind of explanation for it online either. I don't know why, as when I sat down to write this episode and did a second round of research, I found an explanation almost immediately. This story was originally published as a webcomic by Marvel. It's actually one of 11 different stories, several of which were eventually published in 2009's anthology comic called Astonishing Tales, Volume 2. Had Astonishing Tales ran for more than 6 issues, it's possible that this Kid Colt story would have been published there, like its fellow stories did. Anthology books are a hard sell, though, and Astonishing Tales did not last very long before cancellation. Quite frankly, I'm amazed that Marvel still published this story, period. Which is to say that I'm not calling its quality into question, mind you. Overall, I enjoyed this book. But Tom DeFalco is not a name that moves units, no matter how much I personally enjoy his writing, nor is Rich Burchett a blockbuster artist, even if he does do a really good job. Similarly, Kid Colt is not a character that fans are exactly clamoring for. Personally, I assume that Marvel published this story in order to just make some more money off of it. After all, at this point, they would have already paid the creative team to make the webcomic in the first place, and then I believe that the comics were originally released to Marvel's digital subscription service, so that would have been the first round of payment that Marvel got for it, which would limit its market to the paying digital fans only, right? And if I know one thing about webcomic readers, it's that they don't want to pay for shit. No swearing. I have no real idea how well Marvel's digital subscription service did financially, but I would assume that Marvel saw an additional line of income in the readers and collectors of physical comics. They already paid to make the comics, after all. Then they got what money they could from the digital sales, so why not get more money from guys like me? And when the market proved unreceptive to the stories in the anthology format of Astonishing Tales, Marvel then just tried a one-shot with Kid Colt, publishing everything that was done in one go, getting it out there, making what money they could, and being done with it. Why DeFalco and Burchett did a Kid Colt story, I'm not really sure. Looking at the other offerings published in Astonishing Tales, we've got characters like Wolverine, the Punisher, Spider-Woman, Daredevil, Iron Man, and the Fantastic Four's Things, which is a pretty solid lineup of pretty popular heavy hitters. But then we also have characters like Dominic Fortune, MODOK, Sabra, the Shiver Man. Who the
No swearing.
is the Shiver Man? Oh, he's that guy. Alright. Anyways, those are all less well-known characters that I would say Kid Colt would probably fit in with. Kid Colt is more of a Shiver Man than he is a Wolverine, you know? And in an anthology book publishing format, I would say that's a good mix of well-known and more obscure characters. Readers will show up to read about Wolverine and the Punisher, and then you would get an installment of this Kid Colt story. That makes a lot of sense to me. So maybe DeFalco just wanted to stretch his writing legs, and that's why he chose a character like Kid Colt. In an interview that DeFalco did with CBR in 2009, he commented on the cancellation of The Amazing Spider-Girl, and how it might just end his career with Marvel. Having written Spider-related books for so long for the publisher, roughly 12 years in the case of Spider-Girl, he felt like he had been pigeonholed into just being a Spider writer. It's possible that writing Kid Colt was a way to showcase that he could do other kinds of stories. A different setting, after all, in the 1800s American West, a different tone in a tense, quiet standoff story, starring a withdrawn young man, as opposed to the outgoing, earnest May Parker, aka Spider-Girl. Knowing the format that this book came from, I am much more forgiving of DeFalco's little catch-up paragraphs at the beginning of each chapter. They're largely copy and pasted, just slightly updated with whatever cliffhanger the last chapter left off on, and reading them back to back to back in one sitting, it can get really old. Imagine reading Scion's opening page and then Ron Mars's little in-story catch-up 4 times in one comic book. Let me tell you, it gets old. But by the time I hit the second one in this Kid Colt comic book, I just skipped them. I'm reading the Goldarden comic right there. I don't need no stinking recap. Perhaps the most unique part of this comic is the emphasis on the kid part of the character's name. We have read 21 comics in this set of episodes that have starred or featured a kid cowboy, and not one of those characters was an actual factual child. DeFalco establishes that Colt is about 16 or 17 at the beginning of the story, and Burchett makes sure to draw him as short, round-faced, and thin compared to the rest of the characters. And I don't mean thin muscular, like a Ultimate Spider-Man kind of physique, just thin. When sized up against the threats that he faces in this story, who are all older, bigger, and presumably more experienced than him, Kid Colt does not look like he should win. He looks like a flooping kid. So this makes his wins even more impactful, so I think that is incredibly well done by the creative team. And his wins all make sense. I never feel like Kid Colt wins because the story demands that he wins. They feel really earned in this. Having read books like Zimmerman's Rawhide Kid, where Rawhide wins because the story demands it, and he's just awesome and amazing, and he's just the coolest cowboy around, it's a real satisfying change of pace to read a book like Kid Colt, where the character does have to work at what he's doing, but still manages to be successful at it. Of course, the story is left fairly open-ended by the time we reach the end of the comic. Kid Colt did not find an eyewitness, he is still an outlaw, and once Mick Greeley learns that the body is Wilkes's and not Kid Colt's, he is probably going to double down on finding the kid. But the specific momentary threat of Wilkes is done, it was done in a clever and interesting manner, and DeFalco leaves enough story on the line that he could do more if he was given the chance. Along those lines, I think that DeFalco was setting up some kind of story with Colt's younger brother, Jeb. He specifically makes mention that Blaine did not find his brother's body along with his ma and pa, so sure, maybe he is dead somewhere and Blaine just didn't find him. Or maybe he's alive and well and off doing his own outlaw-type activities in the American West. A brief look through the Kid Colt Wikipedia page shows no mention of Jeb ever appearing again, which would have put him in the 1945, I think it was, Kid Colt Outlaw ongoing series, so this wasn't something that DeFalco was tying back into the rest of Kid Colt's narrative. This is something new that he was setting up to explore in the future, I think. And personally, I think that this is a really good pitch. I would gladly pay for more of this comic book. It kind of vibes with the type of story that Lee and Kirby were telling back in the 50s and 60s, like we read in those Silver Age stories, but with a much more modern sense of pacing and with much more time for the story to develop. This comic book is 32 pages long, so it blows way past the page count of almost anything that we saw in those Silver Age stories. So it just has a lot more room to breathe and develop, and it shows. It's good. I really like Burchett's artwork here too. It has echoes of Paul Rainman, Don Heck, and John Severin, all of whom worked on Silver Age Western stories. His characters are unique looking and well designed, their costuming fits the time period, and there's a rough sketchiness that I like to it. We get a little bit of cross-hatching going on when things need to get dusty, and I like a good cross-hatch. Burchett does a good job of filling his panels in, too. There is a lot of detail when it's appropriate to have a lot of detail. His nature scenes look great. He makes the desert feel as varied, interesting, and beautiful as a shot of the forest. Alan Passalaqua was the colorist for these pages, and his work is solid as well, especially when the day slowly turns to night when Wilkes' men were closing in on that cabin. The coloring there is so pretty. He does a great job capturing that slow fade from the bright orange sun of day to kind of a nice warm orange-pink color to the cool blues and grays of night. Very, very pretty looking. I'm sad that scene happened so quickly, but it was just beautiful when it did happen. Oddly, the cover for this issue was drawn by another artist, specifically Luke Ross, and it was colored by Matt Hollowell. It is a nice cover, don't get me wrong, with Kid Colt shooting off panel, his dead horse underneath him with arrows stuck inside of it. But Ross's depiction of Kid Colt is much more adult, much more in line with the other depictions of Kid Colt that we have seen than this one, and so it's a little weird to open up, to look at the comic and go, oh, it's adult Kid Colt, got it, and then you open up the comic and, oh, it's teenage Kid Colt, who's specifically way younger looking than that guy on the cover. There's a weird disconnect there for me, but I'll fully admit this is a gorgeous looking cover. It probably shouldn't have been on this comic, but gorgeous cover. I would like to point out that Kid Colt's real name in the 1950s and 60s comics is Blaine Colt. So author Tom DeFalco did alter his last name when writing this comic, changing it to Cole, C-O-L-E. It is a small change, and it neither adds or subtracts from this story, so I have no problem with it. I do think that it makes the character feel a little less silly to go from someone who was named Blaine Colt to who is then called Kid Colt all the time, to it just being kind of a vocal slur when saying his name. Instead of going, oh, that's Kid Cole, you go, oh, that's Kid Colt, and it just sticks with you. To the best of my research, the rest of Colt's story matches up pretty well with everything that was previously published. He killed the man who killed his father while he was off in town, which is actually much like what happened to the Rawhide Kid in his Silver Age origin, except, that Kid Colt did it first, actually. Kid Colt first appeared in 1948. There we go. That's the date I was looking for. While the first Rawhide Kid appeared in 1955, about 7 years later. So Stan Lee has really been milking that father figure dies, son figure must avenge him and then spend the rest of his life doing good deeds story trope, hasn't he? Wow. As much as I enjoyed this issue, I do have to say, there is nothing special about it other than it being a good comic. It's a nice mix of Silver Age ideas and modern storytelling techniques. It is all well told and well presented, but, it lacks the real-world feel of Ostrander's comics, or the examination of masculine stereotypes in Zimmerman's writing, or even the Marvel weirdness of stories like Vegas, or the ones that were found in the Mighty Marvel Western event. This Kid Colt comic is not a bad comic at all, it just isn't anything special either, and it doesn't surprise me that DeFalco and Burchett never got a chance to do more of these stories. It does make me sad, as I think this is a really solid comic, but in a time when comic books are losing subscribers and buyers, not by the handful, but, there's a decent amount of us, but the fan base is not what it used to be back in the 90s or even earlier eras, especially when Westerns were a popular comic book form. This book just can't compete against characters like Batman and Superman and the X-Men and the Avengers and Spider-Man and Wolverine, and I get it. It just makes me sad to know that that's what the industry is these days to some degree. That a well-made comic book cannot be successful on its own. It has to be something else. It's just a little frustrating. But enough of that sad stuff. Next time, we get to return to the modern age of the Marvel Universe with a new take on a Western. Bounty hunters, mercenaries, outlaw, Texas Rangers, and at least one superhero come together in the face of one vicious corporation in episode 19.17 of Comic Book Breakdown. 6 Guns. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.